My name is Shira Uemura. I'm a host of Eyes on Japan, produced by Channel Sakura.
My name's David Price, and I'm the co-host. I've been in Japan for 20 years. 17 of those have been involved with multinational executive and project-based recruitment. I've helped start 2 companies up, and I currently work for a multinational Fortune 500 company in central Tokyo.
What's this about?
What's happening in Japan is about news that people are aware of in Japan but may not be aware of outside of Japan.
Do you know about this article? This is Asahi newspaper morning issue, which is dated August 5th.
Yes, Sheila, this is regarding the president of a Japanese newspaper apologizing for errors. The president of leading Japanese newspaper, Asahi Shimbun, has often been critical of Prime Minister Abe's policies, and he's apologized over errors in its reporting on controversial subjects, and he plans on making reforms.
So we're going to get back to you next week.
It sounds like a controversial topic, Sheila, and I definitely would be interested to hear how this is being reported within and outside of Japan. Well, the Leadership Forum was held at the Tokyo American Club. The American Club was founded in 1928. It's a private club that consists of 3,500 members from over 50 countries, Sheila.
Who is the main speaker?
The main speaker was Jesper Koll, who is the equities research head at JP Morgan, and he is been a citizen of Japan since 1986, and for 2 decades now, Jesper has been considered one of the top economists. He's written several publications, many publications, several books, and he's a very sought-after speaker.
So let's start.
This is the Tokyo American Club, Sheila.
Yes.
Founded in 1928 by 51 USA businessmen.
I see.
Right, and tonight, Robert Half Japan is hosting their annual Leadership Forum. Robert Half Japan Director Adam Johnson will introduce international economist Jesper Koll, who's going to give his bullish outlook on the Japanese economy.
And it was still Boston, so that's it. My name is Adam Johnston. I'm the Managing Director for Robert Half in Japan. To thank you for your ongoing support and obviously your attendance tonight on a Tuesday evening. It's interesting because next year will actually be Robert Half's 10th year in Japan. I should actually say probably 10th wonderful year in Japan. We released an employment report recently of the Half 2 2014 findings, which essentially show that 35% of hiring managers, and typically the audience has been CIO, CFO, or business leader, are looking to add additional headcount in the second half of 2014 to their team. A further 50% will either maintain or replace any staff that they lose, and only 5% will actually look to reduce their headcount. Other trends show that retention continues to be a very contentious issue, with 90% of leaders worried about losing their top talent. Needless to say, an increase in recruitment activity is needed, as confidence in Japan's economic climate remains high. This demand creates a very challenging environment when you start to consider Japan's demographics and skill supply, especially as we look toward the future. To shed a little more light on that, I would like to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Mr. Jesper Koll. He is well regarded as the authority on Japanese economics, so I'll keep it pretty brief. Jesper is an optimist and explorer of the Japanese economy, an explorer of all things Japan, from high finance to low-level politics. With over 2 decades of experience working within financial institutions in Japan and 2 published books, both in Japanese, he's quite well known already. He describes himself as Japan's last optimist. That optimism has motivated him to mentor the country's next generation of entrepreneurs and business startups, and to promote Japan to the rest of the world, policymakers and investors alike. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Jesper Koll to the stage tonight to give his keynote presentation. Please join me in a welcome round of applause.
What I want to do today is just give you, a little bit of the background and some of the reasons for why one should be optimistic. And I want you to do one thing. In sort of economic commentary, right, there's always this focus on noise. I mean, there's always some data that is being published. There's always some central banker who makes some comment. And all of that stuff's important if you're a trader. If you're a financial securities trader, that stuff's very important because that's obviously real time and you do need to, adjust your portfolio accordingly. But most of us, are not traders, right? Most of us run businesses. You have responsibilities, right, for the people that you employ. You have responsibilities for your headquarters outside of Japan. You have responsibilities to all your stakeholders, whether they are your suppliers, whether they are your customers, or whether they are your shareholders. And from that perspective, I think sort of taking a more medium-term and longer-term perspective, I think is absolutely key. And what I want to do today is I want to pull my age bonus, because I'm probably one of the oldest people in the room, right? I was born in 1961, and I've been stuck in Japan, since before all the girls in the room were born, 1985, right? And, the one question I get asked, which I think is actually very good, right? Which is, okay, what is different this time? Okay, fine. So we've got a new prime minister, right? Is that really what's different? Well, I don't care really whether you like Mr. Abe or whether you don't like Mr. Abe, right? You've got to ask yourself a little bit more of a deeper question, right? What is different? And I will, stipulate to you that the number one thing that is different, this time around, right, is actually the fact that there is a common enemy. And I do not say this lightly, right? I think that people forget with Prime Minister Abe, nobody predicted that he would become the president of the LDP. The only reason he became the president of the LDP is because of the Senkaku issue, right? And the Senkaku issue is a direct threat to the sovereignty of Japan as a nation. Economic threat from China. Japan has been able to turn into phenomenal opportunity. I mean, do not underestimate the nexus, the link between Japan and the People's Republic of China. Yoshikawa sensei, who is the head of the economics department at Tokyo University, he has calculated and demonstrated that the density of economic relations between Japan and China over the last 5 years has been higher than the density of interaction between Germany and France at any point in the 1970s and 1980s. To give you one example, China is Japan's largest trade partner. It's not America anymore. It is the People's Republic of China. And that's true for exports as well as for imports. If you look at the imports from China into Japan, what do you find? You find that 75% of the imports from China into Japan are captured imports, gyaku yunyu. They are products that are manufactured by Japanese transplants or Japanese joint ventures in the People's Republic of China. Also remember, who is Japan's richest man? Yanai-san, right? What is Yanai-san? That is fast retailing, that is Uniqlo. How did Uniqlo make its money? From the People's Republic of China, right? Absolutely brilliant, right? He sold looms of bankrupt Japanese corporations to the Chinese and outsourced to his design, pulling back products into Japan. Did you know that fast retailing in 1999 and the year 2000, fast retailing alone was responsible for 1/3 of Japan's deflation? because the price of closing plunged absolutely massively. So the point I'm trying to make, China as an economic threat, yes, but also an economic opportunity. Japanese business people from Chusho Kigyo all the way up to the big companies have exploited extremely well. They've done very, very well on this, and the nexus between those relations is actually very strong. I will also point out one thing. Prime Minister Abe, for all his nationalism, what was one of the first things that he did? He changed the visa deregulations so that people from ASEAN countries and people from the People's Republic of China can now arrive on a tourist visa much, much easier. Basically the same way that people from Germany or from the United States can arrive. And as a result of that, you've actually had this surge, right, in inbound tourism, which is one of the most concrete ways, right, that Japan's economic recovery has actually taken hold. But you've got this issue of the threat to national sovereignty. These are my islands. No, they're not. They're my islands. Wow. You see, that's when the Chinese People's Republic, when they call, right? At least they have the decency, right? Anyway, you know, so this I think is very different. Now, what it means for you and I as a business person, right? A common enemy, a common rival, what does it do? It unites the ruling elite. And I can tell you, I've been here for 30 years, I have never seen the ruling elite of Japan, whether it is the business community, whether it is the financial community, whether it is the technocratic community in Kasumigaseki, whether it is, you know, the Japanese media, I have never seen them as united as they are right now. No, Japan does not want to become a colony of the People's Republic of China. And as a result of that, decisions are actually being made. Now, it's not just China, but this is also important here. You've got the unifying rival in China, but you also, very often forgotten, you do have pressure from America's biggest friend, biggest supporter. Because quite frankly, Americans love them or hate them. I love them. I'm German. You know, we beat them in the World Cup, so that's okay, right? They've got a German coach, so maybe next time, you know. But no, the point being that, you know, America is very pragmatic. I mean, you can think about the Americans in 1,000 ways, but they just look at the future. They look at the projections, right? In 20 years' time, right? Do you know that in 8 years' time, the population of the Philippines, in 8 years' time, the population of the Philippines will be larger than the population of Japan. So if you're a power person, where is my ally? Whom am I going to bet on? Who is my biggest ally in Pacific? Well, there are some issues in Japan. And losing competitiveness, being stuck in deflation, having no economic growth, right, certainly puts the pressure on as well. And Prime Minister Abe and his team know very, very well that to be respected, to be a player, right, you've got to show that you can generate prosperity, that you can generate, you know, employment, that you can generate, you know, overall economic growth. So I think it's this combination, right, the pressure from both the People's Republic of China as a rival and the pressure from your largest enemy, from your largest friend, right, that I think is one thing that is very, very different, okay? So we've got that. The second thing I want to say is that with this national focus now, right, you've got something else. And put yourself in the position that we're all in. Sorry, which is the position that we're all in. We all have a boss. If your boss changes every 9 months, that's tough. When I look at Japan, I've been here for 30 years. In my 30 years, there were exactly 2 prime ministers who've been around for more than 2 years. Nakasone and Koizumi. All the other guys basically, oh my God, here's a new year, oops, pretty soon we're going to have an election, there's going to be a new prime minister. Nobody can run a country like that. You and I are business people. You and I are investors. Actually, we don't care about the politicians. But we do need them to stay the line, to stay the course, to give us consistency, right? You can agree with President Obama or you cannot agree with Obama. That's not the point. The point is, as the guy, does he deliver what he says he's going to be delivering? Because you and I are business people, we're going to game him. But you need a consistent line here. Japan never had that consistent line. Now they have a consistent line. Whether you like Abe and his team or not, I don't care. What I can promise you, these people will be around for at least another 3 years, possibly all the way up to the 2020 Olympics. And the line that they are presenting is unbelievably pragmatic. I would put it to you, and I'm not putting on my blue eyes and rosy glasses here, I think objectively speaking, compared to America, compared to France, compared to Germany, compared to England, this government is the most pragmatic government that we've got in the G7 right now. Because everything is on the table. Fiscal policy, the Germans, oh my God, couldn't possibly raise deficit spending, that would be a disaster. Japan, look, we've got a lot of debt. It's a lot of deficit that Japan has, which we'll talk about later, but we can still ease up a little bit spending. There needs some infrastructure spending in the regions that needs to happen. We can make it work, right? Monetary policy, they're also pragmatic. And then regulatory policy, Seicho Senryaku, right? The whole growth strategy. Do you like it? Look, as you may have known, I've written a couple of articles. I don't call it a third arrow. You shouldn't call it a third arrow, right? Because arrows are meant to be fired. No, this is 10,000 needles, right? This is like acupuncture that goes in, feels good to you, feels bad to me. Is it going to work? Who the hell knows, right? But, you know, there is stuff that is actually going on. And the good news is that everything is on the table. They're talking about agriculture. They never talked about agriculture before. That doesn't mean that they're going to change agricultural policy from one day to the next, but it is on the table, it is being discussed. Anybody here from Europe? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm an economist. If you look at Europe, one of the great evils in Europe is that Europe has one of the most inefficient agricultural redistribution mechanisms in the world. Is anybody talking about reforming the European Common Agricultural Policy? The answer is not. The national focus is, to actually generate prosperity. And you can see this tactical pragmatism. You've got fiscal policy, since Mr. Abe came about, public investment has actually started to increase quite nicely, right? You've also seen, this quantitative easing, monetary policy coming back, and you're seeing concrete success. I'm sorry, this is, what I do for a living during the day, right? This is corporate profits have recovered very, very nicely. And very important, it's not just the Bank of Japan that is increasing its balance sheet. There is actually on lending. Japan is one of the few countries where there is a positive credit cycle. It's not a V-shaped recovery, but the banks are capable, the banks are ready, the banks are actually lending. This morning I had a group from our private bank. There's a bunch of people from Asia, right, coming through, and a couple of Americans. And many of them came to Japan for the first time. So my opening line was, "Welcome to Tokyo, the only city in Asia with clean air, no traffic jams, and a banker who is prepared to lend you 85% loan to value." Right? So this is good. I never thought that I would say this. When I look at the Japanese banks right now, they're the strongest banking system in the world. They're extremely well capitalized, right? And, you do see that there is on lending. It's not just Governor Kuroda who is printing money. Labor market. Okay, the labor market is a very contentious issue, right? I find it incredible. The unemployment rate in this country has fallen from 6% to 3.5%. Oh, but it's still terrible. Really? Okay, this is another indicator here. You look at the percentage of high school graduates who find employment. I mean, you tell me, but it looks to me that that's pretty close to an all-time high. I guarantee you next year, right, when the employment statistic is going to come through, that this will be a new historic high. The labor market in Japan has turned fundamentally, and in fact, as we'll discuss, is one of the potential issues that you actually have. This is the tourism boom, right, that I alluded to before. And then, yes, it's not my fault, there is inflation. It's not just the restaurants you and I go to, prices are going up. Oh, it's only because of the VAT hike. Really? You can't say that empirically right now, but certainly, my team of analysts actually does find that there's a bit of pricing power coming back into the system. You actually find, and take that note, Japan has a higher inflation rate than Europe and the United States right now. Do not forget this, right? And as a result of that, in the world of money, you find a huge change. Japan and Switzerland, for the last generation, were the two countries with the highest real interest rates. But today, Japan is the country that has the lowest real interest rate. So anybody who's done a little bit of economics, this is a huge change. This is a new reality that Japan actually has. So the first point I wanted to make is, what is different? Japan has a national mission. They do not want to become a colony of the People's Republic of China. And as a result of that, decisions are actually being made. And these decisions are effectively all-encompassing. Everything is on the table. And in my opinion, they're actually very, very pragmatic and are actually beginning to lead to results. The second issue, the second and the third issue I want to talk about is economics. Now, economics is weird, right? What is economics? Economics, when people talk about economics, but they immediately talk about the central bank. Is the Federal Reserve going to tighten policy? What's going on in central banks? But that's not economics. Economics is about allocation of scarce resources. The first report I ever wrote on Japan in 1989 was called Capitalism Without Cost. And it's because Japan was, and I say was, one of the largest surplus countries in the world, right? The biggest creditor country on earth, right? This has changed. Japan today, for the last 2.5 years, is a net importer of capital. Japan is running trade deficits, not surpluses. And these deficits are not going to go away. There are those who say, aha, they run a deficit only because they switched off the nukes, right? Well, it would be useful every once in a while to just look at the numbers. This is the swing in the trade balance from a surplus in 2010 to a deficit. And what do you see? You see, first of all, that fossil fuel imports in volume terms actually did not grow, which is quite interesting. I mean, wow, you've got 50 nukes, you switch them all off, and your energy imports in volume terms actually does not go up. But your energy bill goes up because energy is denominated in dollars and the dollar is getting stronger. So it's all terms of trade. It's actually quite amazing what's actually happened. But even if you do that, even with the yen depreciation, what do you find? You find that the energy imports, right, barely account for 30% of the swing from surplus to deficit. So what is generating the swing? This is here the change, right, in the trade balance, right? And what you see here, you see that basically 2/3, 10.7 percentage points of the 15%, right, was non-fuel. Electrical machinery, manufactured goods, raw materials, food, etc., etc. So it's actually imports of intermediate and final products that is actually driving the turn in the trade balance. You know what's cool about this? Again, if you do the maths, right, you find that basically about 2/3 of that increase in manufactured product imports, gyakyunyu, captured imports, right? This is Japanese companies utilizing their lower cost or their factories in the rest of Asia, in the People's Republic of China, in Europe, not in Europe, in the United States, and pulling the product back into Japan. So this is very, very important. you see that over the last 6 months, this has actually accelerated, particularly the imports of electrical machinery has really started to surge, right? So the key point here, the swing from surplus country to deficit country is not because of energy. It is because of manufactured products. And that's very, very exciting, which in my opinion makes it very clear that the trade deficit is actually, this is by region. You see that the bulk of this comes from, from Asia, which means that in my opinion, the deficit is going to be here to stay. It's not going to go away. Corporate Japan, where do you invest? Okay, so it used to be, the blue line here, right, is manufacturers. You basically see how much goes inside Japan and how much goes outside of Japan. And it used to be 50% in, 50% out. Okay? This is for large listed corporations. Yeah? What happened here, you see a big shoot up from 2010, 2011. Even for this year, corporate Japan, listed companies, still basically about 70% of their business investment is going to be done outside of Japan. Why is that? Why do you do that? Oh, because you don't believe in Abenomics. Really? I don't think any business person, has any belief in any politician anywhere in the world. What? It's a combination. We get to the workers in a second, right? Margins. I mean, I'm just an analyst. What's an operating profit margin in Japan for a listed company? On average, it is 2.5 times lower in Japan than for offshore factories, even with dollar-yen at 105. It's not an exchange rate issue. There's a whole lot of inefficiencies that come into the system that you guys in your businesses battle with every day. My favorite statistics, this country, Japan, has 485,000 wholesalers. But of those 485,000 wholesalers, 3/4 do not have a customer who is a producer or a retailer. So in this country, 3/4 of all wholesalers, oroshiuri, right? 3/4 are a middleman to another middleman, right? That's the real inefficiency that you've got in the system. So it's supply chain as well as merchandising, right? Where Japan, for whatever reason, has kept on to its system. So the reason for why corporate Japan continues to invest aggressively overseas is not because they don't believe in Abenomics. It is just because the profit motive, right, really continues to drive them, in that direction. Now, what is interesting as an economist, and if you are an equity investor, you should pay attention to this. This is the capital stock, Seisan Kajo, right? Remember, Japan, they never close factories, right? They have, over the last 4 years, they've actually started to close factories, which is very interesting. So if you're interested in return on asset or return on equity, right, the fact that they did actually start to close down factories, right, is actually indicating that we're very much moving in the right direction. But the key point is, right, the trade deficit is here to stay. It is going to, in our opinion, is going to continue to widen out. Let me give you one example, one concrete number. Japanese car companies. 5 years ago, Japanese car companies of global production capacity, 62% were located outside of Japan. This summer, this turned into 78%. In fact, Mazda Corporation became the last Japanese car company to start opening a factory in Mexico. So Mazda today is producing about 400,000 cars, right, in Mexico. These are 400,000 cars that are not produced in Hiroshima. And as a result of that, Japanese exports, you read about it in the newspapers, do not pick up. The yen has depreciated by 30%, but Japanese exports are not picking up. This is because of the offshoring that corporate Japan has actually conducted. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's a fantastic thing because it's occurring at a time when the unemployment rate is coming down. So that tells you that the hit to income, the hit to employment from the deindustrialization, net is not a bad thing for the Japanese system, right? That's the number one thing. The number two thing, it is phenomenal for profits. Sorry, I don't want to come across like a stockbroker. Every once in a while, though, I have to be, right? But I can look you in the eye. Japan is going to be one of the few countries where profit margins structurally are going to be improving because the shift towards more profitable offshore factories is going to continue. So that's very, very interesting, and it's a big change, in terms of the way things have behaved before, right? Energy costs are obviously another factor, that are driving, Japanese companies, overseas. There's no question about that. What does this mean? So there's a trade deficit. The trade deficit is structural. It's going to get worse from here on. What does that mean for you and I? What does it mean? It means that I can look you in the eye and say, you know what? The yen is going to be a strong currency. When I arrived in Japan, dollar yen was at 260. Then we had the Plaza Accord. I hated it because Johns Hopkins University paid me a fellowship. I got $1,000 paid at the end of every month. So I was the king of Kyoto, right, for about 4 weeks. And after that, it was downhill ever since, right? But, the fact of the matter now that Japan has become a deficit country, right, the yen is very likely to be a weak rather than a strong currency. I will make a prediction that by the time you and I will be eating our Christmas cake, right, dollar yen is going to be at 122. Okay? I think that the yen is going, and more importantly, I do think that the dollar is going to be very, very strong, as well. So that's the one implication that you actually get. There's another implication that being an importer of capital or being a trade deficit country has. You read a lot about corporate governance. You read a lot about stewardship code changes. You read a lot about the GPIF, the Japanese Public Pension Fund. Oh my God, they're going to focus on returns. Really? Why is that happening? Why is it for real this time? Because if you are a deficit country, you are dependent on global savings to maintain your standard of life. It's a big change from 3 generations when Japan was a big surplus country. So you have to sweat your assets. So in my analyst teams, we now joke, because you've got the large companies of Japan, right? On the second page of their investor presentation, they now have an ROE target. Now, trust me, these companies 2 years ago did not know what ROE meant. But the reason for that, this is a symptom. The disease, so to speak, or the economic driver is the fact that you're an importer of global capital. If you don't believe me, here are the facts. The equity market. The only net buyer of Japanese equities for the last 6 months, for the last 18 months, for the last 2 years, for the last 5 years has been the global investor. Okay? Now, but Koru-san, the government bond market, the JGB market, it is still owned by Japanese. Really? Of course it is. But look at the numbers. The interesting thing is the rate of change. 2 years ago, 5% of government debt was owned by non-Japanese. Today, it is 8.3%, and it continues to go higher. So yes, thank you, Kuroda-san. The Bank of Japan is buying a lot of government bonds, but the domestic institutions, the banks, the insurance companies, the pension funds, the GPIF, they're all selling. The only net buyer of government bonds is the global saver. And the global saver demands a global price. So what is different this time around is you've got actual economic of scarcity. Japan is not a creditor country. Japan is a deficit country. And as a result of that, these focus on ROE, ROA, return on capital, efficiency, all of this stuff, this time, it is for real. The second thing, you're running out of capital. The second thing, which is very cool, which is that, you are actually running out of labor, right? Can I take my jacket off? Since you're running out of labor, I mean, that means somebody has to work harder, right? Kind of? Sorry. You guys have it good. How many more minutes do I have? Sorry, I don't have a watch. 12. 12 minutes, okay. Ha! Okay, now the sexy part. Can I tell you an anecdote? So we've got this, David, how old is the 17-year-old son, right? We've got this 17-year-old son. And so 2 years ago, right, they go to the American school, right? And 2 years ago, the American school introduced Chinese language. Yup, gotta learn Chinese, gotta learn Chinese. And of course, my wife and I, the boy speaks reasonable Japanese, right? And so we try and convince him. We said, hey, Taiko, you should learn Chinese, right? So he looks me in the eye and says, hey, Papa, how many people are there in China? Well, I think there's about 1.3 billion. Papa, in 10 years' time, is there going to be more or less? Oh, there'll be way more. They're breeding like rabbits. Sorry. No. So, okay. So, Papa, in Japan, how many people? Well, there's about 126 million people. So, Pups, in 10 years' time, are there going to be more or less? I said, they're plunging like a rock. There'll be way less, right? So the little rascal turns around and walks away from me and over the shoulder says, Dad, you're an economist. You'll understand. I stick with Japanese. And he is right. He is absolutely right. Because you want to be where there is a scarcity. You don't want to be where there is everybody. And that's why I think I absolutely want to be reborn as a 23-year-old Japanese. I think it's the best thing to be in the world right now. When people talk about demographics in Japan, everybody focuses on this, right? The number of people over 66 is going to grow every year by 434,000 every year between now and the Tokyo Olympics. So I love being in Japan because it's the only country where everybody else is getting older faster than I do. It's fantastic. It's the greatest advertisement for Japan. This is cool, right? We do time travel, so to speak, right? But, when you then, look at the next bracket, 36 to 55, every year is going down by about 170,000, right? And then comes the absolute sweet spot, 25 to 35 is going down by basically 250,000 people every year over the next 5 years. And you do want to be where there is scarcity, right, in the overall system. So that, I think, this is then the kids, underneath that, right? So that's really the spot that you want to be. So, scarcity. Why is that good news? I'm going to make a thesis to you. Okay, you can imagine me as a 23-year-old Japanese, right? Here is the thesis you should write or email to your boss tomorrow. Japan is going to be the only country where there will be a new middle class. Okay? And the reason is the following. When you look at the Japanese labor market, the labor market in Japan has nothing to do with the salaryman. The salaryman is done and dusted. The labor market in Japan has changed dramatically over the last generation. This is the big change. You find that the hiseisha, right, the non-full-time workers, right? Let's call them part-time workers, right? The part-time workers basically have gone from 20% to 40%. Okay? Huge structural change. Have you ever thought of that? I mean, you've got to think about economics. At the end of every month, who receives a paycheck where in Japan? 20% of the people work for the government. 20% of the people are salarymen. 20% of the people are entrepreneurs, self-employed, and 40% are these guys, right? So what will happen now that labor is in scarce supply? What's going to happen? Companies are going to arbitrage back the non-part-time workers, the part-time workers, right? They're going to be arbitraged back into the system, right? So you're going to get this flip. And I will make a prediction that by the time we have the Tokyo Olympics, the part-time workers will be less than 30% of employment. This is natural. This is economics. It's already happening. The best companies in Japan, Uniqlo, Shitsure, if there's a competitor of Uniqlo somewhere. So it's a perfectly fine company, but anyway, as you know, they have rehired their part-time workers on a full-time basis. NTT has rehired 5,000 of their part-time workers on a full-time basis. This trend is going to accelerate simply because of Jukyu Kanke, because of real economics. And this is fantastic news. Absolutely fantastic news. Because what is the difference between a part-time worker and a full-time worker? It's basically 10% in terms of the non-wage benefits, give or take, and another 40% in terms of your annual pay. So you read a lot in the newspapers, oh, but base pay is not going up, right? Kihonryo, right? Oh, it's growing at only 1.5%. Have you ever looked at the statistics? The number of people who receive the base pay on a full-time basis has grown by 185,000 every month since the beginning of this year. Now put this in perspective. America is an economy, the labor market is 3 times the size of Japan. American non-farm payrolls currently are growing at a rate of about 200,000. Japan, an economy 1/3 of the size, grows at 185,000. In fact, if you do look at the data, Japan today, over the last 6 months, has been the single biggest job creation machine in the OECD world. It is absolutely phenomenal. Japan, by the way, is one of the very few countries where the participation rate, so the number of people in any age group who actually are working, is actually going up. It's not just women. There's a lot of focus on womenomics, which is good politics. We've got local elections next year, so bring out the vote. This is fantastic. But again, this is driven by bare-bone economics. So what is different this time? What is different is that, number one, Japan has got a common enemy, which means it focuses the mind, which means that decisions are getting made. Number two, Japan is running out of capital. So as a result of that, companies are beginning to sweat their assets more effectively. M&A activity is going to continue to boom, right? Number three, your basic cost, your basic capital is human capital. There's really very little companies, unless you're from the Middle East, you don't really have much other capital. Unless you're JP Morgan. No, sorry. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, human capital is your basic capital. I mean, JP Morgan without the people is nothing, right? With a little bit of IT, but that's probably being hacked at as we speak, right? But the reality is the human capital is starting to be in short supply. So the greatest announcement, the greatest simple example for how Japan is changing. Who is Japan's largest employer? Hitachi Corporation. It was on the tip of your tongue. Yes, you're right. It's the biggest client. Biggest client? Really? No, okay, well, should be. Hitachi Corporation, just last week, what did they announce? They announced that they are going to introduce pay for performance, right? They're going to grade people into 7 ranks, right? And they're going to introduce it, right? This is very, very interesting because, again, if you look at this, right, from an economic perspective, right, evaluating people at the end of the year, ranking people and paying people on the basis of performance rather than on the basis of seniority, right? makes me, as an economist, very, very optimistic that indeed the overall efficiency in the system is going to start to be increasing. You are also going to see an acceleration in the wave of mergers, not because the bankers are not going to lend to inefficient companies, but because chushokigyo, small and medium-sized companies, are running out of labor. Right? This is very important. Cost as a driver, labor cost as a driver of integration. So those 482,000 wholesalers, I guarantee you that in 5 years' time, the number will be shrunk by at least a third, if not more, because they're running out of their most essential asset, which is human capital. So that's sort of, you know, it's a little bit of what I wanted to talk about. There's obviously tons of other stuff that we can discuss, right? But I just wanted to step away a little bit from the sort of stuff that is discussed in the newspapers. Kurikashi shimasu. It is different this time. There is a common enemy which focuses the mind. Japan is not a surplus country. As a result, it will sweat her assets more productively. And number three, Japan is running out of labor. And when a country runs out of labor, people get creative. So really, I want to be reborn, maybe not as a 23-year-old Japanese man, but as a 23-year-old Japanese woman. Anyway, let me stop here and sort of take the floor for any of the questions that you may have. Arigato.
His seminar sounds so interesting. Do you think that we're going to continue for next week?
Sure, I'd be very interested to hear some of the attendees' opinions of his speech and get some of their comments on the economy and maybe, you know, how it's affecting their companies.
If you have a question and opinion, please contact us. Sayonara.
Sayonara.